Welcome to another episode of the Unnamed Podcast. I'm Swaku with my host, John, and we are starting a new series looking at the second wave of the New Blood introductory decks. More videos in the series as we go through the 4 new decks in hopefully alphabetical order, but let's see what happens.
Yeah, so today we'll be having a look at the Banu Haqim New Blood deck. According to the product description, it is a deck where you use a combination of stealth, threats, and violence to triumph. Your vampires have both high political status and excellent combat skills.
Cool. So before we do like a deep dive into the deck itself and the cards, let's just have a quick look at what the deck sort of includes. So we have 6 vampires, 5 unique vampires. There's a repeat in there, and out of those 5 unique vampires, there are 4 unique titles. Average capacity is 7, which is I think a little bit on the higher side, but we'll see how that works out when we deep dive. 48 library cards. It's about 20% masters, 20% ish, 15-20% action cards, almost 30% combat, and then the rest is a mix of political cards, action modifiers, and reactions. So this is starting to look a little bit combat-ish, like a third of the deck is combat.
Yep, it is.
Yeah, so that kind of ties in with threats and violence. Looking good so far.
That's something the Banu Haqim are pretty good at.
Yeah. I mean, it's hard to be a contract assassin if you're not good at some sort of violence. So I think this is a good opportunity to have a quick look at the new cards as well as some new art for reprints, and then some notable reprints from cards that were like from yesteryears. So there are 2 new cards, 2 new crypt cards in this New Blood deck, and there is a significant number of reprints. Let's have a quick look at the new cards first. The first new card is, I might be butchering this pronunciation, but I'll give it a go. It's Oluwa Funmilayo. She is a Banu Haqim Camarilla Prince of Lagu. Oluwa Funmilayo gets +1 intercept during political actions. She's 8 capacity and has superior auspex, superior celerity, superior obfuscate, and superior blood sorcery. I kind of like this one. It's a new prince, and it's the first Banu Haqim with superior auspex. You know I like auspex.
Who doesn't?
Interestingly, I think I might be wrong here because I'm not the designer, but I think she might possibly be designed to sort of work in both a generic Banu Haqim, blood sorcery deck, as well as the new Group 6, the Kickstarter Tigarius, and Victoria Ash, just because she shares the superior specs, the celerity, the blood sorcery, and I think Tigarius and her are both kind of intercepty, but that's me going off on a tangent. What do you think, John?
I like her. The auspex, you can take it or leave it. As you say, it doesn't really synergize well with the other Group 6 princes that you see in the reconstructed deck. But yeah, it's certainly useful in other crypt combinations.
Yeah. And I'm not 100% sure. I think 8 capacity for Prince for discipline spread is really already very decent. I think the +1 intercept against political action is really just a situational, like if it comes up, it comes up. I don't even know how relevant really that becomes, considering she already has access to second edition.
I mean, she has access to Eyes of Argus as well, right? So if
Yeah.
you're playing a mix, you don't need to pop second tradition every time.
So Lagu here should refer to the Nigerian city rather than the Portuguese one, because her name is actually a Yoruba, in the Yoruba language, which is the language of, I think, I could be wrong, East Africa, so that general region, and it actually means like God gives me joy. But it will be interesting to see what happens if further down the road we get a prince or a baron or the archbishop of Lagu, Portugal, and then it would be like, rules wise they would contest, but it would be a little bit strange.
Sure.
Not sure how BCP is gonna do with that, but that's future them problem. Anyway, so that was Oluwafun Milayo, the new prince. The other new vampire from this deck is Rajun Shah. He's a 4 capacity Camarilla Banu Haqim with inferior obfuscate and superior blood sorcery. I think he shares the same sort of space as Nayarana, which is the other 4 capacity Banu Haqim. I think she's inferior celerity, superior blood sorcery.
Yeah, I guess spoilers for a later discussion, but I actually think Arjun is not a great fit for this deck, but he's certainly a welcome addition to the whole Banu Haqim crypt.
So that's the 2 new crypt cards from the deck. There are 3 reprints with new art or new-ish art. First one is Camera Segregation. We've got a new art from I'm gonna butcher every name in this video. I apologize to everyone who might or might not be affected. So it's a newish art from Gines. Sorry, dude. And that's Camera Segregation. This art was previously released as an event promo. The last time outside of the event that was printed, I think, was in Camera Edition. So that's a while ago. The other card with a new art is Closed Session, which was last reprinted in 2005. And this was the new art that Black Chantry sort of revealed without the card text in one of the earlier newsletters, and there was a fair bit of discussion around what card this new art would actually go, and now we know it's Closed Session. And then the last of the new art reprints is Swaco here with some breaking news. We have just received something exciting from Black Chantry Productions, and here it is, the very first look of the new art for Elder Intervention by none other than our own arts director, Ines. Stay tuned a little bit for John's hot take on what he thinks about this new art. Back to you in the podcast. I kind of like new art in general. It gives a feeling of like newness without actually having to have actual new cards.
Sure, I can respect that.
I mean, this version of Closed Session definitely better than an empty table and empty chairs.
Oh yeah, definitely Closed Session. It's an improvement.
Yeah.
I do prefer the older art for Elder Intervention, but there's certainly nothing wrong with this one.
Unfortunately, I don't think people play enough Elder Intervention for me to be able to recall the art from the old one properly, so I'll take your word for it.
It has worked its way into a couple of my decks, but yeah, it's certainly not a first pick.
So that's the cards with that's the reprints with new art. Just quickly go through the list of cards that have been reprinted. So all of the cards in this list haven't been printed in the last 10 years. So Kabar Community, that was last printed in 2004. Grooming the Protege was last printed, or rather only printed in 2006. The Black Throne was previously and only printed in 2007. Yoruba Shrine was last printed in 2005. Kabar Glory last printed 2007. Archon last printed in 2005. Ali's Fang, a favorite of certain Facebook groups, last printed in 2001. Weather Control last printed in 2008, and Wind Dance last printed in 2002, and only ever as an event promo. So that's the list of reprints from this deck. I think some of it is fairly, I guess, needed reprints. I would say things like Kabar Glory does go into a fair bit of Banu Haqim decks. If you're not familiar with the card, it is a one stealth action that requires Banu Haqim. It's unique and not usable if any non-mandatory actions have been performed this turn. Put this card on this Banu Haqim and unlock them. This Banu Haqim gets +1 bleed, and if your prey is ousted, you get an additional 4 pool and burn this card during your unlock phase. So it kind of like sticks around for a turn, gives you +1 bleed, and there's a bonus 4 pool somewhere. I think the other one that caught my eye was Archon. That's a pretty decent political action. Let me just quickly read the text here. So political action requires a Prince of the Justica. Choose a Camarilla Vampire. You don't have to control it. Just any Camarilla Vampire. If this referendum is successful, put the card on the chosen vampire. This vampire may enter combat with a vampire controlled by another Methuselah as a +1 stealth directed action. Any vampire attempting to block this vampire burns 1 blood. Bloodhounds cannot be called on this vampire, and any Camarilla Vampire can call a referendum to burn this card as a +1 stealth political action.
Yep, I'm a big fan of Archon.
Anything else in this list that sort of caught your fancy?
Camarilla segregation. That's something that, or judgment Camarilla segregation, I should say. It's not something you used to see, just because Camarilla princes used to be king, but nowadays with Anarchs running around a lot, it's something that is becoming more relevant and has been fairly hard to come by until now.
So yeah, you're right. With the proliferation of Barons and Anarch decks, a bit of spoiler for a future video, but with Child of Revolution in the new Bruja New Blood deck, I think we might start to see even more Anarch shenanigans, and this becomes like it's not a fast sort of bleed kind of card, but it does punish people a little bit for playing Anarch Barons or Anarch, like Anarch decks. I think the deck does kind of meet its, I guess the expected strategy, which is to use a bit of stealth, a bit of threat, a bit of violence to, work your way to victory. And vampires are both political, and I don't know about combat skills. I guess having blood sorcery and now the addition of Kali's Fang is some sort of a combat skills, but overall, yeah, 30% of the deck being combat cards does make them a fairly decent combat threat.
Yep, it's packing 6 Hunger of Marduk, so with additional strikes that should be pretty decent.
Yeah.
Like I mentioned earlier, Arjun doesn't actually have celerity, so that's why I think the other 4-cat with Superior Thaumaturgy would be more suitable, but like I said, he's a welcome addition to the entire crypt, so while he might not fit this pre-constructed deck as ideally as you might want, but
yeah, because in this deck, I think he basically just functions as a 4 capacity with superior blood sorcery. So I think there's only 2 cards in the deck that requires Obfuscate.
yep,
So
2 copies of Swallowed by the Night.
Yeah, you're definitely not gonna run him just because of Obfuscate. In the in the wider sort of card pool, if you're merging this New Blood reconstructed deck with the 5th edition Banu Haqim, I guess, starter, he does come into a lot more. He does come into himself. So it's like, there's a phrase for this. I can English. Give me a minute. He does come into his role a little bit more. I think it maybe a little bit contentious sort of opinion, but I think between him and the other 4 cap, Banu Haqim, his inferior Obfuscate might give him a sort of like a slightly more tactical advantage during gameplay as opposed to inferior celerity. Because inferior celerity, I guess, typically is just additional strikes. You're basically just looking at additional strikes, whereas inferior Obfuscate does give you that occasional opportunity to sneak past and, you know, make use of your Hakim's Law Retribution.
Sure.
Yeah.
If we're not talking about Anarchs, yes, celerities at inferior isn't the greatest. You basically have quickness and pursuit.
But you're right, the deck outside of Arjun being a little bit of an odd choice in this deck, I guess he's a new crit card, so if he has to show up somewhere, this is probably as good a place as any for him to show up. But overall, I find the deck might be a little bit disjointed out of the box. So I'm talking about if you go up against 4 other New Blood decks, just because having 2 copies of Qasim, so a third of your crypt is 9 capacity with no. I don't see any any transfer acceleration, so no Zilla's Valley, no Dreams of the Sphinx, no Information Highway, or any of that sort. I think having 2 9 capacity in a introductory deck is a bit tricky to pull off.
Yeah, the quote unquote acceleration comes in Groom the Protege, which doesn't help the first vamp, but yeah, at a 9 cap, they were looking at least 3 rounds of transfers, which is unfortunate.
The rest of the deck, I think it's pretty alright. You've got the 4 political actions, so 2 more parity shifts on top of the 5th edition deck, and then you get Banishment and Archon, which, like you mentioned before, Archon is a pretty good political action if you have space for it, especially if you're a combat kind of deck. And you get some, vote push in the likes of Alamut and the Black Throne.
Yeah, the Crypt certainly has a lot of votes in their titles.
I think you get like 3 princes and a Justica if you actually get around to bringing Qasim out.
Yeah, exactly. I would have liked to see a bit more, I guess, forward movement in the political action area. Just 2 parity shifts, and and Kabar Glory. That's about all the forward movement you have in terms of damaging your prey. So it's a little light. You might just be bleeding for 1 a lot.
There is the 1 copy of Hakim's Law Retribution, so the
yes.
master card that allows you to discard combat cards to.
I overlooked that one. Yep. Okay.
Yeah.
Then.
But it is, however, it does. But it is still also just the 1 copy, so you might not end up getting it. it's not too bad with the Kabar community, because that gives all your Banu Haqim, which is your entire crypt here, +1 stealth with bleeding. Some of the cards in here, like camera segregation, the Kabar community, I think can be removed by someone else's action, but I find generally people don't really do that, especially with community where you kind of want you want it on the turn where you launch. But that's a pretty good addition, I feel, to the deck overall, and to the Banu Haqim sort of arsenal. Elder Intervention, I'm not too sure if it really sits in here. I mean, between the two of us, I guess you're the expert on Elder Intervention. Do you reckon, considering they have 4 copies of second tradition, you reckon that's something you would?
Considering that 2 of the other vamps besides the new one, Qasim Bayer and Fire Sarub, they both have inferior aspects, I might just consider subbing in Eyes of Argus just for the inferior intercept. If you didn't have any aspects at all, I actually don't hate the 1 copy of Elder Intervention, just because that stacks up with second tradition for a total of 4 intercept on a bleed.
Yeah,
that should be enough.
It does help you deal with stealth bleeders quite a bit. If you were looking to merge this with the 5th edition Banu Haqim starter, what would you put in and what would you leave on, I guess, the cutting, the editing floor, the cutting, there is a word for it.
The cutting room floor.
There we go. Again, English, I swear. Anyway, back to the question. Yes, if you were to merge this with the 5th edition Banu Haqim starter, what would you be looking to put in and what would you leave on the cutting room floor?
Well, between the 2, you can take the decks in a few different directions. If you want to go a bit more Voti or a bit more combat heavy or combo avoidance, Yoruba Shrine is something I typically don't think to put in my decks. Not that it isn't strong, just failing an directed action is solid, but what that basically boils down to is, I guess, rushes, or I guess there are things like step and banishments which you would want it to have to be ready for. It's fine. I'll take the gamble and not run it. That's just me.
Fair enough. I've kind of always been on the fence for Yoruba Shrine, just because it's, like you said, there are some cards out there that you really don't want your vampires to get hit by, like sensory deprivation or banishment, and then there's always the odd, cryptic mission sort of decks, although I think maybe that's Yoruba Shrine doesn't really protect against that as much. Maybe something like Shattering Crescendo, Yoruba Shrine would be better against. But yeah, it always kind of ends up not finding a space. Like, it gets bumped by something else usually. Because Banu Haqim does have some fairly, I guess, utility master cards, especially now that they've got Haqim's Law Retribution. Sometimes just an extra copy of that one might be more useful than, Yoruba Shrine. So yeah, I'm kind of with you on that. What else would you chuck in?
Yep. If you're leaning into Haqim's Law Retribution, I'm quite a fan of that card with breed kind of actions. So in this case, you would be looking at either Embrace or what is it? Second tradition progeny?
Third tradition progeny.
Third tradition. That's exactly it. Yes.
Yeah. And I think if you were leaning in towards Hakim's Law and into Hakim's Law Retribution and into a breed sort of option, Kabar Glory would be. I would probably chuck a couple of copies of Kabar Glory into the deck if there's space for it.
Sure.
Yeah. Archon, I think, is an interesting one. Given that Archon showed up in this deck, would you consider leaning into that angle and like a vote rush and a deck? You think it's possible to spin it in that direction?
I quite like Archon as a reusable rush. That way, because you're not rushing is kind of an action you're not always gonna want to take, but you want it to be handy. So having it on the table whenever you want it is nice. But with Banu Haqim having the option to play Hunter's Mark, which is a bit more than a rush. I'm not sure. I would play Archon. I might just play more Hunter's Rush, even though it doesn't have the flexibility to be used as like a fleetness where you can use it to bleed.
Yep.
Maybe a mixture of the three.
I think an interesting thing to note here for newer players, you may not be as might be aware of an old mechanic called Blood Cursed, which affected all Assamites, which is the previous iteration of the Banu Haqim, or the previous name that Banu Haqim went under. All Blood Cursed vampires basically were not able to commit Diablerie, which means that the extra sort of ability of the Archon to be immune to Blood Hunts never really came up for Banu Haqim, or previously known as Assamites. Now that the 5th edition Banu Hakims don't get Blood Cursed, that might sometimes come up.
Sure.
It might, yeah. I don't think it comes up very often, but it might be a thing sometimes.
I honestly totally didn't realize that sentence was on Archon.
Yeah, to be fair, Archon is a little bit wordy. It's also got a, sort of a, it also kind of acts like a pseudo deterrent to blocking, just because vampires need to burn blood in order to block it. It does make it a little bit more awkward to do things like, block so that the Banu Haqim will play stealth and then play like deflection or telepathic misdirection, because you end up paying 2 rather than 1. Especially with like narrow minds, and then that becomes 3. It adds up. It's also interesting to note that a vampire can have more than one Archon. So a vampire that's already an Archon can be the target of another Archon referendum. And the blood burning for vampires, they do stack.
Now that is interesting.
And it's not just for bleeds. If you're playing a political a political deck, your kind resources contested and your parity shifts also get this little annoying burn blood block. I guess feature for you, but for your opponent. So there is an interesting reprint in here that I kind of want to get your opinion on, which is Wind Dance. So Wind Dance is a blood sorcery combat card. In inferior blood sorcery is strike dodge, and as superior blood sorcery it is strike dodge with an additional strike dodge this round. What? I don't think we've seen it very often before. I think part of it is because this was an event promo. It was never in any set, so probably the limited number of copies might be a reason. But how do you rate this card?
How do I rate this card? Something that just crossed my mind, so this makes for great recording. It doesn't have the word limited, or it didn't have the word limited on it. I don't think, what do you call it, errata text has it either. So does the additional strike count towards the limit?
So based on the card template for quickness, it seems like, let me just quickly pull up quickness, but I do feel like quickness also doesn't have that text that says this is not limited. Yeah, so quickness quickness specifically says this is an additional strike that does not count towards the limit. So it would be interesting to see when the deck comes out if this missing bit of text, the missing limited, becomes relevant.
Yeah, because that's certainly a contributing factor, because in a clan with celerity, you're going to want those additional strikes, and you don't want to play Wind Dance for 2 dodges and then not be able to additional strike on top of that. Personally, I would probably run side flips instead.
Yeah,
I think Wind Dance has more of a place in Tremere where they don't have access to celerity everywhere.
but it's a good point that Wind Dance doesn't really work in a deck with celerity, because you've got other options, especially select both dodge and additional strikes are easily available in celerity. And on top of that, that is a very good point with that missing text of additional strike. I suspect that the card text will be updated with limited. Hopefully someone with a better understanding of the rules can drop a comment and let us know if we got it right or we got it wrong, or we've stumbled into some sort of gray area where, this might come up. Alright, before we wrap up, any last thoughts on the deck, on the new cards, the reprints, the new art, anything of the sort?
No, I like it. It certainly works well on its own. It might be a little slow to get going, but it's also a good collection of cards to supplement your Banu Haqim pre-constructed deck.
Yeah, I think Black Chantry has managed to put together a introductory deck that can stand on its own against other New Blood decks, but also manage to find that balance between a good deck to play as a first time, or the first few times you play VtES, as well as having a decent selection of reprints in there that would excite existing players. So with that, we've come to the end of the review for the Banu Haqim New Blood reconstructed deck. Thank you, John, for being here today.
Thank you for having me.
And yeah, I hope you, the viewers, the listeners, have found this helpful. And if you think we've missed anything, or if you think there's anything else you'd like us to cover or like to see other than the other New Blood decks, those are coming, let us know in the comments. Also, if you're watching this on YouTube, remember to give us a like, subscribe to the channel, and share the video with your friends. And until next time, see ya.
Bye.